Hello and welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. It is Build a Deck Tuesday, and in today's video we are going to complete the channel's second Oathbreaker deck as we install our non-creature spells and land base to our Nicol Bolas God-Pharaoh Oathbreaker deck. What's up, MTG BC, baby? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Let's get right down to completing our second Oathbreaker deck. You chose the Oathbreaker. That is Nicol Bolas God-Pharaoh. You chose the signature spell. That is Deliver Unto Evil. If you missed any of the previous installments in this current deck building series, you can click on the links in the description below. These are the creatures we have included so far in this Oathbreaker deck. We have Nightscape Familiar, Augur of Bolas, Dreadhorde Butcher, Vampire Hexmage, Plague Crafter, Opposition Agent, Hull Breacher, Thief of Sanity, Spark Double, Hostage Taker, Nicol Bolas, the Ravager, which transforms into, of course, Nicol Bolas, the Arisen, Massacre Girl, Croesus the Purger, Itali Primal Storm, and the Massacre Worm. These are the creatures in this Grixis Oathbreaker deck. Now, let's roll out our non-creature spells, install our land base, and call it an Oathbreaker deck. So here we go. We're going to start off with some spot removal. Terminate. Black and a red instant, destroy target creature. It cannot be regenerated. That's a good start. We're also going to throw in a copy of Dreadbore. Same mana value, but it's sorcery speed. Instead of destroying target creature, we get the option of destroying target creature or Planeswalker. A fantastic card to add in a format ripe with Planeswalkers. Next spell, we are going to put in a copy of Kolaghan's Command. One black and a red, we get to pick two of the following four modes. We can return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. We can force target player to discard a card. We can destroy target artifact, or we cast Shock. So, for the purposes of the Oathbreaker, not Oathbreaker, I have no idea what that is, the Oathbreaker format, I can see a lot of destroying artifacts and shocking Planeswalkers. Particularly, as a nice tertiary option, we can return one of those great creatures from our graveyard right back to our hand. All right, that is removal spell number 3. Another spot removal spell that's going to work out wonderfully in this deck is going to be Vraska's Contempt. 2 and 2 black at instant speed, exile target creature or Planeswalker, and we get to gain 2 life. Let's not overlook the 2 life aspect of this card. In Oathbreaker, your starting life total is only 20, so gaining back 10% of your original life total while also exiling a creature or a Planeswalker, well, that seems pretty strong to me. All right, so now we're going to kind of shift away from our spot removal and start to focus a little bit more on global removal. Just for the purposes of our opponents, however, not for us. Liliana's Triumph. 1 and a black at instant speed. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If we control a Liliana Planeswalker, which we don't, so we're not going to read it, 1 and a black, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Sitting down at an Oathbreaker table, you can have, it's a multiplayer format, so you can have a lot of creatures hitting the yard at instant speed for just 1 and a black. Let's up the mana value a slight bit from Liliana's Triumph of 2 to Soul Shatter at 3. 2 and a black at instant speed. Each opponent sacrifice a creature or a Planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and Planeswalkers they control. Again, this does not touch our board. We keep our creatures and Planeswalkers right where they should be, and our opponents are forced to either put maybe their Oathbreaker back in the command zone or one of their cards straight to the graveyard. 1 copy of Soul Shatter. Next up, kind of staying on the same wavelength of Soul Shatter, but with the potential to be a little more powerful. We have a copy of Vona's Hunger. 2 and a black at instant speed, each opponent sacrifices a creature. However, if we have the City's Blessing, which we get if we control 10 or more permanents, instead each opponent will sacrifice half the creatures they control, rounded up. So if an opponent has 3 creatures and we have the City's Blessing, that opponent is sacrificing 2 of them. Vona's Hunger is going to do a lot of shifty, sneaky, heavy lifting in this Oathbreaker deck. Like we're a little crooked here. Does it look crooked? I don't know. All right, I think that looks better. No crookedness, no slanty shanty. All right, so again, staying on theme with global removal spells against our opponents, we're going to throw in a copy of No Mercy. 2 and 2 black, this enchantment reads, whenever a creature successfully deals damage to us, destroy it. Notice that it says deals damage. It doesn't necessarily have to be combat damage. Any creature that deals damage to us, No Mercy will destroy it, and then that's all they're going to write. So that's going to be a nice combat deterrent, as long as we don't get into a situation where the combat damage that's coming our way ends up costing us the game. All right, the next card up that we're going to include, still on the wavelength of opponent global removal, it was actually one of the options for the signature spell. Seems like it's strong enough to include in the 58, and that's going to be Dark Intimations. For 2 blue, black, and red, it's a sorcery that reads each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Then they discard a card. We return a creature or planeswalker card from our graveyard to our hand and then draw a card. And of course, if this is in our graveyard and we have the fortunate occurrence to cast our Oathbreaker of Nicol Bolas, then we can exile Dark Intimations, and then Nicol Bolas will enter the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it. So that will help us to tick up quicker to the Big Bang, and let's not overlook that, because that would put him to 8, which means we just have to keep him alive a couple of turns before we can execute the -12 of the Big Bang. Dark Intimations is another one of those cards that's going to affect all of our opponents, but not us. All right, as we shift away from global opponent disruption to something that could have an effect on some of what we have in our deck or the command zone, but not all, we're going to include a copy of Hour of Devastation. 3 and 2 red at sorcery speed. All creatures lose indestructible until end of turn. An Hour of Devastation will deal 5 damage to each creature and each non-Bolas planeswalker. So this is a great global removal spell to clear the board of hopefully as many creatures as possible, toughness dependent, as well as hopefully send a lot of other planeswalkers either to the graveyard or back to the command zone, but not Nicol Bolas. So this card kind of is meant to be included in this Oathbreaker deck. All right, and the last few cards we have here, there's not really a specific, how do you want to say, this isn't really like a specific grouping for the last of these spells, so we're just going to call these one-ofs to help synergize the deck, maybe do and expand, enhance some of the things that Grixis does best. And one of those spells is going to be one of the other signature spell options that the community could have selected in Reigns of Power. You and target opponent each untap and gain control of all creatures the other controls until end of turn. Those creatures have haste. The best thing about this card, other than swapping creatures, is that we're focusing this deck in a multiplayer format. So it's not going to be one of those situations where we have to send our opponent's creatures at our opponent and they have to block with ours. We could take our opponent's creatures and then attack a different opponent with them and let those two armies hash it out, while our creatures are just nice and safe under the temporary control of the Reigns of Powered opponent. That card seemed too strong to not include in the 58. Another card that we're going to include that affects one of our opponents is going to be a copy of Cruel Ultimatum, the ultimate Bolas Grixis, not removal spell, but let's face it, if it was 1v1, this can be considered a win condition. 2 blue, 3 black, 2 red. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, loses 5 life. Again, let's not think that 5 life is a lot. That's 25% of your starting life total in this format. We return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. We draw 3 cards, and then we gain 5 life. So we put 4 cards into our hand. We gain 25% of our original starting life, and we leave our opponent down 3 cards, down 5 life, as well as a sacrifice creature. Cruel Ultimatum is going to wipe out at least one of our opponents. Next card up, we only have 5 non-creature, non-artifact, non-mana rock spells left, and that's going to be a copy of Jeska's Will. 2 in a red, we get to pick one. However, if we control our commander, if we control our Oathbreaker of Nicol Bolas as we cast this spell, we may choose both. We can add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, or we can exile the top 3 cards of our library, and we may play them this turn. Jeska's Will is proving to be a very excellent source of not only red mana, but also an extension of the top of our library to put 3 more cards in our hands, possibly able to cast all 3 of them, or play all 3 of them that turn. If one of them is in a land and we have an available land drop, we can put one of them right onto the battlefield. Speaking of card advantage, 1 copy of Fact or Fiction. 3 in a blue at instant speed, we reveal the top 5 cards of our library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. 1 into our hand and the other into our graveyard. And again, because this is a multiplayer format similar to Commander, the potential to have some political influence with this card is also present. So Fact or Fiction is going to be another great Grixis card as we round out our colored non-creature spells. Next card up, Rakdos Charm. Just the versatility of this charm makes it one of the most powerful charms in all of Magic. 1 black and 1 red, and of course at instant speed, we get to pick one. We can exile all cards from target player's graveyard, which could be devastating for any Oathbreaker deck who's focusing on their graveyard. We can destroy any artifact, and there are going to be some troublesome and problematic artifacts that we will get into. And lastly, if we're going up against any kind of tribal or token deck, each creature will deal 1 damage to its controller. In some instances, we can look at Rakdos Charm as a game saver and a win condition. Alright, we're down to our last 2 colored spells, and this one, you're going to see this spell and you're going to wonder, why wasn't this spell one of the signature spell selections? Well, here's the reason. If we sit down to a game of Oathbreaker and this signature spell is sitting in our command zone, we instantly become target number 1 just because of what this spell can do, particular to this format. And that's going to be the Elder spell. For 2 black at sorcery speed, we can destroy any number of target planeswalkers. We choose a planeswalker we control, and we put 2 loyalty counters on it for each planeswalker destroyed this way. So by keeping the Elder spell in the command zone, each of our opponents see it, they know what's coming, and every single resource of every single opponent is directed squarely right at us for the entirety of the game. That's why I decided to neglect including this spell as one of the options for a signature spell. Instead, we'll keep it safely hidden within the 58. But the Elder spell is definitely included in this Grixis build. Last colored non-creature spell, and it's a bit of a doozy, and under the right circumstances, if the turns play out the way we hope they do, it could help us cast our Oathbreaker on turn 3. And that's going to be 1 copy of Mana Drain. Counter spells, I don't generally play with them. I have a disdain for them. My meta group has a disdain for them. But this spell, and it's 1 counter spell in the 58, it's more about what the spell can do. And that is, at the beginning of our next main phase, we add an additional amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So think of it this way. Turn 2, we got 2 blue up. Somebody casts something that costs 4 mana, we counter it, we get 4 colorless mana at the beginning of our next turn, or at the beginning of our first main phase of our next turn. We play our 3rd land, we use the 4 colorless to cast Nicol Bolas, God-Pharaoh. We got an unbelievably powerful Oathbreaker in play with a mana value of 7, on turn 3. So mana drain is going to be included in this build. And those are the non-creature spells that are included in this Oathbreaker deck. So very quickly, let's talk about our mana rocks, our lands, and close out Oathbreaker deck number 2. So because we are in Grixis colors, we do not have access to green and green's ability to ramp. So we're going to include 5 different mana rocks to help take the place of our missing green mana. We're going to have a Dimir Signet, we're going to have a Rakdos Signet, and we're going to have an Izzet Signet. So all 3 of those possible signets, well, those babies are in addition to 1 copy of Arcane Signet. So we're playing with 4 signets. And lastly, because we are a Grixis deck, we were playing 3 colors, we're going to toss in a copy of Chromatic Lantern. It gives all lands we control tap to add 1 mana of any color, and it also does the same thing, the artifact itself. Those are our mana rocks, and now it's time for our lands. We have right here 3 basic islands. Those are going to be included in the 58. We have 3 basic swamps. Those are going to be included as part of our land base. And you guessed it, folks, because you know how I am about symmetry, we got 3 basic mountains. So those are going to be the basic lands included in this Grixis Oathbreaker deck. All right, now we're going to get to our non-basic lands. We have 1 copy of Grixis Panorama, taps for a colorless, or we can tap this and sack it, and we can search our library for any of those previous 9 basic lands we just showcased, and we put that bad boy onto the battlefield tapped. 1 copy Grixis Panorama. We're going to include a Riverglide Pathway, blue on the front, red on the back. You get to pick when it comes into play. Speaking of blue and red, 1 Steam Vents. It's going to be our Izzet Shockland. Again, we return to the Tainted series, Tainted Peak. As long as we have a swamp, this will give us a black or a red mana, or it will tap for 1 colorless. Tainted Peak is going in. We have our Rakdos Checkland, Dragon Skull Summit will give us a black or a red. And we have our Rakdos Shockland, Blood Crypt, black or a red. Again, revisiting the Tainted series, Tainted Isle, because if we've got Tainted Peak, it makes sense to include Tainted Isle. Gives us a blue or a black as long as we control a swamp, or it will tap for a colorless mana. Eschewing Watery Grave, that's more based on availability than anything else. We're going to include 1 of the battle lands, and that is going to be Sunken Hollow. It's an island swamp, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. That's going to give us a blue or a black mana. Next up, we have our Dimir Checkland. Wow, I blanked there for a complete 2 seconds. Dimir Checkland of Drowned Catacomb. And we're going to include a copy of Graven Cairns. It's our Rakdos Filter land. And lastly, the last 2 cards, just to make sure we can get those tainted lands online. 1 copy of Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. And lastly, the single greatest card in the format, 1 copy of Command Tower. And that will do it. We have installed our land base. We included our mana ramp in our artifact and our mana rocks here. We have installed our disruption removal spells. Got our creatures, we got our Oathbreaker, we got our signature spell, MTG BC. We have our second Oathbreaker deck. Be on the lookout as we continue this series and build Oathbreaker deck number 3. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.